ever get that feeling? Like you're trying to figure out what the government is up to.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you're trying to crack a code or something. Well, we've been diving deep into this really interesting document. It's a request for information.
An RFI?
Yeah, RFI. And it comes from the General Services Administration,
Yeah.
the GSA. But it's actually on behalf of the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness.
That's a long one.
I know, right?
But it's a very important office.
Yeah, absolutely. So this RFI, it's kind of like the government's way of, reaching out, getting a feel for what's out there. And in this case, they're looking at something called Personnel and Readiness Infrastructure Support Management Services.
Which is quite a mouthful, so we usually just call it PRISM.
Right. PRISM makes it much easier. And this particular RFI, they're really zeroing in on how this PRISM support would work for their major Department of Defense systems.
Or MDoDS for short.
MDoDS, exactly. So think of it this way. This RFI, it's like the very first step, the very beginning of a potential acquisition.
Exactly. They're testing the waters, seeing who's out there, and who can potentially do the work.
Right. It's like they're asking small businesses, hey, are you guys around? And could you maybe help us out with this PRISM thing? This personnel and readiness infrastructure support for our really big, important military system.
They were really complex ones.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing, and this is really important. This RFI, it's not a contract award. It's not like a guarantee or anything. It's purely for market research, just to get a sense of the landscape.
They're just gathering information at this point.
Exactly. So if you're a small business and this is your kind of thing, well, you need to submit your response by April 7th. 2025, which means, this is all happening right now in early April 2025. And that's why we're doing this deep dive today. We want to break down this whole RFI, give you the most important insights.
Exactly. Cut through all the jargon and give everyone the key takeaways.
All right, so let's get started. First things first, can you kind of give us the big picture here? Like what's this RFI really about?
Sure. So this RFI is about getting more small businesses involved in something called the MDoDS pool. It's part of this bigger thing, this PRISM multiple award task order contract, a MATOC.
Okay, so PRISM MATOC, got it.
Right. Now, the initial PRISM MATOC, that was actually awarded back in July 2024.
Yeah.
And there were two main pools within it.
Pools?
Yeah. One was for general personnel and readiness support, kind of across the board. And the other one, the MDoDS pool, that's the one we're focusing on today. And that one's specifically for those, those big, complicated defense systems, the major ones.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this straight. PRISM, this overall contract, it's all about providing support services, right?
Yeah.
For personnel, like people and readiness.
Yes.
And this is all within the Department of Defense.
Exactly. Making sure our military folks and their partners have everything they need.
To be ready for anything.
Exactly, to be ready. And it's also about making sure everyone can work together smoothly. Collaboration, that sort of thing.
So sounds pretty fundamental.
Absolutely. It's the foundation for everything else they do.
And the fact that they're doing this whole PRISM thing, that says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like they're really committed to using outside help, external experts.
It does. And, that's where those agile, smaller companies come in, the ones who can navigate the ins and outs of these big defense contracts.
And those companies, they could have a real opportunity here.
Oh, absolutely. They could play a big role.
Now, from what I understand, the government wants to keep things pretty flexible in terms of how this work gets done.
Right. Yeah, they do. They can actually issue task orders under this MDoDS using different types of contracts.
Different types? Like what?
Well, they could go with firm fixed price. That's where the cost is, agreed on beforehand. It's fixed.
Makes sense.
Or they could use cost plus fixed fee, where the contractor gets reimbursed for all the allowable costs, plus a fixed fee on top.
Okay, so they have options.
They do. They could even do a kind of hybrid thing, mix and match elements of both.
Interesting. And why do you think they're doing that? I mean, why all the different types of contracts?
Well, it gives them flexibility, right, to address different types of needs. Some tasks might be really well defined, perfect for a fixed price contract.
Where you know exactly what you're getting into.
Right, but then other tasks might be more open-ended, more exploratory.
And those might be a better fit for a cost-plus contract.
Exactly. So they're keeping their options open.
Smart. Now, these different approaches, they must present some interesting challenges for small businesses, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Hybrid contracts, they can offer a good balance of risk and reward, but but you really need to know your stuff.
You got to understand both the cost accounting and the performance-based stuff.
Right. So for small businesses, it's crucial to, to really dig into the details of each task order, figure out what they're getting into.
Don't just jump in blindly.
Yes, exactly. Do your homework.
Okay, so it sounds like they're trying to be as efficient as possible with this whole process, right?
Yeah.
Didn't they mention something about STOPE and TDLs?
Yeah, you're right. They're using something called streamlined task ordering procedures. STOOP, they call it.
Stew poop.
It's all about speeding things up, reducing the time it takes to award those individual tasks.
Oh, I see. So less bureaucracy, more action?
Precisely. And then there are these technical direction letters, TDLs.
TDLs. And what are those all about?
Well, think of them as a way for the government to give specific technical guidance, but without all the, the red tape of a formal contract change.
So it's a faster way to adapt.
Exactly. They can respond to changes more quickly.
Makes sense. I mean, in a lot of government projects, speed and efficiency are key.
Absolutely. Especially in today's rapidly changing world.
Right. Now, there was also something about a performance work statement, wasn't there?
Yes. They referred to a PWS as Attachment 1 to the RFI. That's the document that really spells out the work, all the details.
Oh, the nitty-gritty.
Exactly. The blueprint for the whole thing, the objectives, the specific tasks, everything.
So potential bidders can really see what's expected of them.
Exactly. No surprises.
All right, so we've talked about PRISM, we've talked about the MLUC. Let's dive a little deeper into this MDoDS pool. What exactly is it? What does it cover?
Right, the MDoDS pool. It's all about providing support for those really critical, these really high-stakes systems.
The big ones, the important ones.
Exactly. It's about personnel and readiness support for those, but only for the systems that are, significant and complex, as they say in the document.
Significant and complex military or defense-related systems. That's quite a mouthful.
It is, and it tells you a lot. We're not talking about your everyday IT systems here.
Right, this is serious stuff.
These are large-scale mission-critical systems. Cutting-edge technologies.
Systems that represent a huge investment in our national security.
Exactly, and that's why they need this specialized support.
So can you give me some examples? Like, what kind of systems are we actually talking about here?
Sure. Think about national security systems. The infrastructure that protects the country from all sorts of threats.
That's vital.
Absolutely. And communication systems. The systems our military uses to communicate, to coordinate their actions.
Command and control, that sort of thing.
Right. And then there are surveillance systems, gathering intelligence, keeping an eye on things.
And I imagine there are lots of other systems too, right? Any kind of system that helps enhance our national security and our military's readiness.
Exactly. If it's complex, if it's important, it probably falls under the MDoDS umbrella.
Okay, that gives me a much clearer picture. Now, who are the main players here? Who are these strategic partners involved in the MDoDS pool?
Well, the RFI mentions a few key organizations. At the top, of course, there's the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness.
Right. They're the ones running the show.
They are. But then you've got all the branches of the military, too.
The Navy, the Air Force.
Right. The Air Force, which now includes the Space Force, of course, and then the Army and the Marine Corps, and don't forget the National Guard Bureau. They're in there, too.
Wow, so it's a pretty diverse group.
It is. And that means communication and coordination are going to be absolutely crucial for anyone who wants to work on this.
Oh, yeah. I imagine it could be a real challenge to navigate all those different organizational cultures.
It could, but the companies that can do it, the companies that can understand all those different needs and communicate effectively, those are the ones that are going to stand out.
They'll have a real advantage.
They will. They'll be the ones the government wants to work with.
Now, for those small businesses that are looking at this opportunity, what kind of expertise are we talking about here? What industry should they be in?
Well, the RFI mentions some specific NAICS codes, those North American Industry Classification System codes.
Right.
And the main one they list is 541715. That covers research and development in the physical, engineering, and life sciences. Except for biotechnology, that is.
So it sounds pretty technical.
Oh, yeah. It tells you that they're really focused on, on companies that can bring some serious technical chops to the table.
Okay. But they did mention other NAICS codes too, right?
They did. They said that for individual task orders, other codes might be relevant, like 541611, which is for administrative management and general management consulting services, and 541330 for engineering services.
So it sounds like they need a mix of things.
They do. They want companies that can innovate, that can develop new technologies, But they also need companies that can provide strategic advice that can help them manage these complex systems.
It's not just about building stuff. It's about understanding the big picture.
Exactly. It's about helping the government make the best use of these systems.
And helping the people who use and maintain those systems, right?
Right. Throughout the entire life cycle of the system, from development to disposal.
Which reminds me, they mentioned something about 3 functional areas within the MDoDS pool. What were those again?
Oh, yes. They divided the work into 3 main categories: MDoDS sustainment, MDoDS modernization, and MDoDS lifecycle.
Okay, break those down for me.
Sure. Sustainment, that's all about keeping the systems running. Maintenance, operations, that sort of thing.
Keeping the lights on.
Exactly. Then there's modernization. That's about upgrading the systems, keeping them up to date, making sure they can meet the evolving needs of the military.
So kind of like renovations, I guess.
Kind of, yeah. And then finally, there's life cycle. And that covers everything from the very beginning, the development and acquisition of the system, all the way to the end when it's finally retired.
So cradle to grave. Interesting. So a company could specialize in one of these areas, or maybe even all 3.
They could. And I imagine each area would present its own unique challenges and opportunities, of course.
For sure. Like sustainment. That seems like it would be more about, steady, long-term work.
You're probably right. A lot of maintenance contracts, that sort of thing.
Whereas modernization, that sounds more like more project-based.
Yeah, a lot of one-off projects, upgrading specific systems.
And maybe more opportunity for innovation, coming up with new solutions.
That's a good point. Whereas life cycle support, that would probably require a broader range of skills. Everything from acquisition strategy to disposal planning.
Right. You'd need to be a jack of all trades.
Pretty much. So yeah, each area is different.
And each one offers something different for small businesses.
Exactly. So they need to figure out where they fit in best.
All right, let's talk money. The financial side of things. What kind of dollar amounts are we looking at here?
Well, there are a few important details to keep in mind. First, there's a minimum guarantee for small businesses that get a spot on the PRISM A2C, but don't immediately get a task order.
So they're guaranteed something, even if they don't get any work right away.
Exactly. It's not a huge amount, just $2,500, but it's something.
It's a recognition of their commitment.
Exactly. But then for individual task orders that are awarded under the MDoDS pool, those are going to have a minimum value that's above the simplified acquisition threshold.
The simplified acquisition threshold. Remind me what that is again.
Sure. It's basically a dollar amount. Anything above that threshold triggers a more formal procurement process. More paperwork, more oversight.
More hoops to jump through.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about the maximum amount? What's the biggest a single task order could be?
Well, the RFI says that the maximum for a single task order, including any options, is $400 million.
$400 million.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a lot of money.
It is. And the total ceiling for the whole PRISM MATOC, again, including all options, is even bigger. It's $1.8 billion.
$1.8 billion. That's enormous.
It is a significant amount of money. And here's the other thing. There's no limit on the number of task orders. They could issue as many as they need.
So the work could really add up.
It could. This could be a long-term, very lucrative opportunity for the right companies.
Now, they also mentioned a CLIN schedule.
Yes, the contract line item number schedule. That basically breaks down all the different services and contract types, all the different categories of work.
So it's like a menu.
Kind of, yeah. You've got your CLINs for firm fixed price contracts, your CLINs for cost plus fixed fee, and your CLINs for straight cost contracts.
And these applied to both the OSDPR and their partners, right?
That's right. Both the Department of Defense entities and the civilian agencies.
And they even have CLINs for other direct costs, things like travel.
Exactly. Yeah. Because they recognize that some of this work will require travel.
Makes sense. Now, this is going to be a multi-year contract, right? They mentioned option periods.
Yes. The base year of the contract started back in July 2024. So this RFI in April 2025, it's really about getting more small businesses involved for the option years.
The option years?
Yeah. Option period 1, that runs from July 15th, 2025 to July 14th, 2026. And then it goes all the way through option period 4, which ends in July 2029.
So we could be talking about several years of work here.
We could, for the companies that win a spot on the MATOC.
Okay. Now, let's talk security. Obviously, that's a big deal when you're dealing with defense systems. What did the RFI say about security clearances?
Well, they said that the specific requirements would be determined at the task order level.
So it depends on the specific work.
Exactly. But they did say that at least a secret clearance would be required for some tasks.
So companies need to be prepared for that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They need to know what clearances their staff have, and they need to be able to get those clearances if necessary.
Because otherwise they won't be able to do the work.
Exactly. So that's something they need to think about very carefully.
And geographically, where is most of this work going to be done?
The RFI says that the main performance location is the National Capital Region, the NCR.
So Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, that area.
Right. So companies need to be prepared to work in that region.
Okay, so we've covered the structure of the contract, the key details, the security requirements. Let's shift gears and talk about what the government is actually asking for in this RFI. What do companies need to include in their response?
Sure. The RFI outlines 3 main sections for responses.
3 sections. All right, what's the first one?
The first section is all about administrative information, basic stuff about the company.
Name, address, contact information, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Their cage code, their UEI, their small business status.
So pretty standard stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. It's the kind of information the government needs to keep track of who they're dealing with.
Okay, what about the second section?
That's called questionnaire answers. And this is where things get a little more interesting. This is where the government really starts asking some specific questions, trying to get a better understanding of what these companies are all about.
So these questions are important. They give us insight into what the government's priorities are.
Absolutely. They really do.
So what are some of the things they're asking about?
Well, first off, they want to know about the company's experience. Specifically, their experience working with the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness and, any of its different parts.
So have they worked with this office before?
Right. And they want concrete examples, actual projects they've worked on.
Not just, oh yeah, we've done some work in this area. They want details.
Exactly. They want to know what the company has actually accomplished.
Makes sense. What else?
Well, they also want to know about the company's staffing strategies. How they plan to recruit, hire, and retain the people they need to do this work.
The qualified professionals.
Right. And they want to know if the company plans to use its own staff or subcontractors or a combination of both.
So they're thinking about the company's capacity. Can they actually handle the work?
Exactly. They want to make sure these companies can deliver.
And it sounds like they're also interested in collaboration.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They ask specifically about partnerships, whether the company has relationships with other businesses, specifically other than small businesses.
So they could potentially team up.
Right, to get the job done.
And I guess that makes sense. I mean, some of these projects could be really big.
They could. And the government wants to know that these small businesses have the resources to handle them.
So it's not just about individual expertise. It's about organizational maturity. Can they manage a project of this scale?
Exactly. Can they handle the complexity?
Right. What else did they ask about?
Well, they asked about specific technical skills. What skills does the company have that are relevant to the PWS?
So they're looking for a match between the company's expertise and the work that needs to be done.
Exactly. They also asked about experience managing MATOCs. Contracts like this one. Have they done it before?
Because this is a big contract.
Yeah.
And managing a MATOC is different from managing a regular contract.
It is. There are a lot more moving parts.
Right. And they also asked about security clearances, didn't they?
They did. They want a breakdown of the company's staff security clearance levels. How many people have secret clearance, how many have top secret, that sort of thing.
Which goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Security is a big deal.
It is.
And they asked about experience with specific OUSD PNR programs, right?
Yeah, they specifically mentioned the DRRSS program.
Yeah.
They want to know if the company has worked on that before.
Interesting. So they're looking for very specific experience.
They are. And they also asked about accounting systems, for companies that might be interested in bidding on cost reimbursable task orders.
So companies that might be working on a cost-plus basis.
Exactly. They need to have a DCAA-approved accounting system.
DCAA.
The Defense Contract Audit Agency.
Right. So the government can audit their books.
Exactly, to make sure everything's on the up and up.
Okay, so it sounds like they're asking a lot of detailed questions.
They are. They really want to get a good sense of what these companies are capable of.
All right, so what about the third section, the last part of the response?
That section is for any questions the companies might have about the PWS. The performance work statement.
So if something's unclear, they can ask for clarification.
Right. And they can also offer any feedback or comments on the RFI itself.
So it's their chance to provide input.
Exactly.
Now, did they say anything about how these responses should be formatted? Like margins, font size, all that stuff?
Oh, yeah, they did. They're very specific about that.
They always are.
1-inch margins, 12-point times New Roman font, single-spaced.
Okay. And is there a page limit?
Yeah, for the first 2 sections combined, the administrative information and the questionnaire answers, they can't be more than 12 pages long.
12 pages. All right. And what about classified information? Can they include that in their responses?
No, they specifically said no classified information.
Which makes sense. I mean, this is just market research.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do companies actually submit their responses?
They have to email them.
Email.
Yeah, to a specific list of email addresses that are listed in the RFI.
And what's the deadline again?
4:000 p.m. Central Time on April 7th, 2025.
Okay, so they need to get their responses in soon.
They do, if they want to be considered.
Now, what about proprietary information?
Mm-hmm.
If a company wants to share some sensitive information as part of their response, can they do that?
They can, but they have to follow some specific instructions. They need to clearly mark any information that's proprietary.
So the government knows to keep it confidential.
Exactly. And they even provide specific legends that need to be included on the title page and on any pages that contain restricted data.
So companies need to pay close attention to those instructions.
They do, if they want to protect their information.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the PRISM MATOC, the MDoDS pool, the RFI process. What would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that the government is serious about working with small businesses. Specifically, they want to involve small businesses in supporting these major defense systems.
Is really important systems.
Exactly. And this RFI, it's a great opportunity for small businesses to get their foot in the door, to show the government what they can do.
But it's not just about any small business, right? It's about small businesses that have the right kind of expertise.
Right. They need to have technical expertise, they need to have experience managing complex projects, and they need to have a good understanding of how the government works.
And they need to be able to meet those security requirements.
Absolutely. So if you're a small business and you're thinking about responding to this RFI, you need to do your homework.
Read the RFI carefully. Read the PWS carefully.
And really think about whether this is the right opportunity for you.
Because this is a big commitment.
It is, but it could also be a very rewarding one.
So as you're thinking about all this, here's a question for you. What does this whole emphasis on small businesses, what does it say about the future of defense contracting? Is the government shifting its focus?
It's an interesting question, and I think it's one that's worth exploring further. Are they looking for more innovation? Are they looking for more agility? Or is it something else entirely?
It's something to think about.
It is, and it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
It was a great discussion.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.